My son walked out the front door to buy me a birthday cake. He never came back. For 25 years, I believed he was gone forever. Then, locked inside my own basement on the night of my 71st birthday, I turned on the television. He was standing on a large stage smiling at 500 people, and he said, "25 years ago, I made a decision that changed my life forever. Tonight is my rebirth." And I saw his face. I'm incredibly grateful to have you here, to help us connect. Please comment below, letting me know where you're watching, from what country or city are you in. Also note that this story features scripted elements for entertainment and education. Names and settings are coincidental, but the core message remains highly valuable for you. The potato soup had gone cold again. I noticed it the same way I noticed most things in that basement, slowly without surprise, the way a man learns to stop expecting warmth. I was sitting at the small folding table Monica had set up for me months ago, the one with the uneven leg that scraped against the concrete floor every time I shifted my weight. The bowl in front of me was pale and thin, the kind of soup that tasted like an afterthought. But I ate it anyway, one careful spoonful at a time, because eating was still something I could control. 71 years old. Tonight, I was 71 years old. I had not always celebrated my birthday this way. There was a time not so long ago in memory, though a lifetime ago, in feeling when this date meant something. A kitchen full of the smell of pot roast. My wife Ellen's voice carrying down the hall. 2 boys arguing over who got to carry the cake. Those were the years when November 14th meant I was a man who had built something worth celebrating. Ellen had been gone for 11 years. Richard had been gone for 26. And my Brandon had been gone for 25, lost on a night just like this one, when he had walked out the front door to buy me a birthday cake and never came back. The grief counselor I saw in the years after told me that survivor's guilt was natural. She told me the ache would soften with time. What she did not tell me was that some griefs don't soften, they calcify. They become part of the architecture of who you are, load-bearing walls you can no longer imagine removing without the whole structure coming down. I pushed the soup aside and pressed my palms flat against the table. The basement was quiet except for the hum of the old furnace in the corner and the faint sound of footsteps somewhere above me. Monica moving through the kitchen, probably. She had her routines the same way this house had its routines the same way I had mine. She brought me soup at 6. She turned off the hallway light at 9. She did not come downstairs again after that. I had not always lived this way either. 2 years ago, I had been in the upstairs bedroom, in the house I had owned for 38 years, in the room where Ellen and I had slept and argued, and made our peace with each other more times than I could count. Then I had started asking questions about money, about the accounts Brandon had supposedly left behind, about the insurance payout that had quietly disappeared into a trust I had never agreed to establish. And slowly, steadily, the walls of my own home had begun to close in around me. Monica had said it was for my safety. She had said the stairs were becoming dangerous for a man my age. She had called it a practical arrangement, temporary, just until things were sorted out. That was 8 months ago. The stairs had not gotten any less dangerous. Things had not gotten sorted out. And I was still down here eating cold soup on my birthday while my daughter-in-law moved quietly through the kitchen above my head. I was reaching for the remote control on the shelf beside the table, an old habit turning on the television for noise more than company, when I heard the front door open and close upstairs. Monica leaving briefly, perhaps. Or Gary arriving. Gary Vance was the man Brandon had sent to the house under the title of security consultant, a broad-shouldered figure who spoke in clipped sentences and watched every room like he was cataloging it for later. I had learned early on not to ask Gary direct questions. He had a way of answering them that made me feel smaller than I already did. I clicked the television on. The screen flickered to life, cycling through the input channels before settling on a local news broadcast. I was about to change it when the Chiron at the bottom caught my eye. Live Thorn Tower. Grand opening, Seattle, Washington. I set the remote down. The camera was sweeping across a gleaming atrium, all glass and steel and sharp angles, the kind of building that announced its own importance before you even stepped inside. A crowd of people in evening wear stood in the lobby, champagne glasses, raised faces turned toward a low stage at the far end of the room. A banner stretched across the back wall read, "Thorn Enterprises, Building the Future." The anchor's voice came through the small speaker. Billionaire developer William Thorne tonight officially unveiled the crown jewel of his Pacific Northwest portfolio, the 70-story Thorn Tower in downtown Seattle. Thorn, who has been a dominant force in West Coast real estate development for nearly 2 decades, chose tonight specifically for the opening ceremony. The camera cut to a man stepping up to the podium. He was tall, broad through the shoulders, dark hair going silver at the temples in a way that looked distinguished rather than aged. He wore a charcoal suit that fit him the way expensive things fit people who have learned to expect that everything will. He smiled at the crowd with the easy confidence of a man who has never once doubted that the room was meant for him. My soup spoon hit the concrete floor. I did not hear it land. I was on my feet without knowing I had stood up. My knees were pressing into the edge of the table. My hands had found the shelf beside the television and were gripping it the way you grip something when the floor beneath you stops being solid. The man at the podium was speaking now. His voice came through the speaker low and smooth, polished by years of boardrooms and deals closed over handshakes in places I had never been invited to. "I chose tonight for a reason," he was saying, and the room applauded. 25 years ago, I made a decision that changed my life forever. Tonight is about honoring that moment. Tonight is my rebirth. I stopped breathing. The camera moved in for a close-up, and there it was. Just beneath the line of his jaw, partially hidden by the collar of his shirt, curving like a thin parenthesis against his skin, a scar, pale and small and perfectly shaped, a half-moon pressed into the flesh beneath his chin. My hands began to shake so badly that the shelf rattled against the wall. I had stitched that scar myself. He was 10 years old. He had fallen off the back porch trying to climb the oak tree, and the gash had been deep enough that Ellen had covered her mouth when she saw it. I had sat him down at the kitchen table and told him brave boys keep still, and he had gripped my hand hard enough to leave marks, and when it was over, he had looked up at me with those dark eyes and said, "Dad, does that mean it's mine now? The scar?" I had laughed and told him yes. It was his, something that belonged only to him. I was staring at that scar on a television screen in a city I had not visited in 15 years, on the face of a man worth hundreds of millions of dollars on my birthday in a basement I had been told was for my own good. "Brandon," I said. My voice came out like something broken being forced to work. "Brandon." The man on the screen smiled again. The crowd applauded again. William Thorne, billionaire developer, Seattle's golden name, lifted his glass and drank. My son was alive. My son had been alive for 25 years. And tonight, on the anniversary of the night he had walked out of my life, he was standing in a room full of people who were cheering for him. My legs gave out completely. I caught the shelf before I hit the floor. My chest felt like something enormous was pressing down on it from the inside, not pain exactly, more like the physical sensation of 25 years of the wrong kind of grief trying to find a new shape. He had chosen tonight deliberately. He had said so himself, 25 years ago. My rebirth. He had chosen my birthday, the night I had spent every year since, in mourning for him, and turned it into a celebration of himself. The footsteps above me stopped. Then they started again, faster, moving toward the basement door. I straightened up. I wiped my face with the back of my hand. And when the door at the top of the stairs opened and Monica's voice came down, "Arthur, I heard something fall. Are you all right?" I had just enough time to look at the television one more time. The scar beneath his chin caught the stage light as he turned. I stitched that scar myself, when he was 10 years old, and I would know it anywhere in the world. Monica came down the stairs the way she always did, carefully, one hand on the railing, each step measured like she was calculating the weight of her own presence. She was 43 years old, slight-framed with dark circles under her eyes that no amount of sleep ever seemed to touch. She had been Brandon's wife for 16 years. She had been my warden, I now realized, for the last 8 months. She stopped at the bottom of the stairs and looked at me. I had made it back to the folding table. I did not know how. My legs had carried me there on pure instinct, while my mind was still standing in front of that television screen, watching my dead son raise a glass of champagne to 500 strangers. I had turned the television off. The spoon was still on the floor. I had not picked it up. "I heard a noise," Monica said. Her eyes moved from me to the television to the spoon on the floor. "I knocked it over," I said. My voice came out steadier than I deserved. 25 years of learning to keep things inside will do that to a man. Clumsy, old hands. She studied me for a moment longer than felt comfortable. Monica had always been a careful observer. It was one of the things I had admired about her once, before I understood what she was observing me for. "You didn't eat," she said, nodding toward the bowl. "Not hungry tonight." "Arthur?" She said my name, the way a nurse says a patient's name, not unkind, not warm, either just precise. "You need to take your medication." She crossed the room and set a small white cup on the table beside the soup bowl. Inside it were 2 capsules, the oval ones pale blue, the ones the doctor, whose name I had never been allowed to verify, had prescribed for what Monica called my episodes. She had never explained what the episodes were specifically. She said things like agitation and confusion, and "we just want you comfortable, Arthur and I had been too worn down in those first months to push back the way I should have." I looked at the capsules. I looked at Monica's face. "Go ahead," she said. She pulled the chair across from me and sat down, which she almost never did. Usually she set the cup down and went back upstairs. Tonight, she was staying. Tonight, she was watching. I picked up the cup. I put both capsules on my tongue. I lifted the glass of water she had brought and drank. She watched me swallow. "Good," she said quietly. She reached out and picked up the soup bowl. "I'll get you something warmer." The moment her back was turned and her foot hit the first step, I pressed my tongue to the roof of my mouth and let both capsules drop into my palm. They were damp but intact. I closed my fist around them and held them there while I listened to her footsteps cross the kitchen floor above me. Then I opened my hand and looked at what I was holding. A man who has spent 30 years working in forensic accounting learns one thing above everything else. The most important information is never the thing you are meant to see. It is the thing tucked beneath it, the number that doesn't quite line up, the date that is 1 day off, the signature that leans the wrong direction. The capsules were standard pharmaceutical size, but the casing on one of them did not feel right. I pressed it gently between my thumb and forefinger and felt something shift inside, not powder, not the soft give of medication, but something with edges, something folded. My heart knocked hard against my ribs. I worked the capsule apart with my thumbnail. It took longer than it should have because my hands were still shaking from the television, from the scar from 25 years crashing into 8 minutes of live broadcast. But I got it open, and inside, wrapped around what appeared to be a standard capsule insert, was a strip of paper no wider than my little finger. The handwriting was small and precise. "Listening system is active. Do not swallow the medication. I am working on a way to get you out. Do not react to this note when I return. Destroy it after reading." I read it 3 times. Outside, a car moved slowly down the street, its headlights sweeping briefly across the basement window before the darkness closed back in. The furnace hummed. Somewhere above me, Monica ran water in the kitchen sink. I had lived in this basement for 8 months, telling myself there was no way out. That the phone lines were dead, I had tried twice and found nothing but silence. That Gary watched the exits. That Monica reported everything. That I was too old and too tired and too hollowed out by grief to fight whatever machine Brandon had built around me. I had told myself all of that because I believed it. Now I was holding a strip of paper in my shaking hand that told me I had been wrong about at least one part of it. Monica was not my enemy, or she was not only my enemy. She was something more complicated and more dangerous than that. She was someone who was afraid of the same thing I was afraid of, and who had apparently been waiting for the right moment to say so. I touched the note one more time. Then I pressed it between both palms until it was a tight, compact square crossed to the far corner of the basement, where the old utility shelf stood, and tucked it behind the rusted paint cans that had not been moved in 15 years. Not destroyed, not yet. A forensic accountant never destroys a document until he is certain he no longer needs it. I went back to the table and straightened the soup bowl. When Monica came back down the stairs 4 minutes later with a fresh bowl and a piece of bread on a plate, I looked up at her the same way I had looked up at her every night for 8 months. Tired, quiet, an old man running out of reasons to argue. "Thank you," I said. She set the bowl down. Her hand rested on the edge of the table. For just a moment, 2 fingers pressed lightly against the wood, like she was steadying something. Then she picked up the empty medication cup, looked at it briefly, and set it back down without comment. "Good night, Arthur," she said. "Good night, Monica." She went back up the stairs. I listened to each step. I listened to the door close. I listened to the kitchen go quiet. Then I sat down, and for the first time in 25 years, I started to think like a man who intended to win. The second set of footsteps was different. I had been sitting at the folding table for nearly 2 hours, not sleeping, not moving, just listening to the house settle around me the way old houses do, when the people inside them finally stop pretending everything is fine. I had cataloged every sound, the furnace cycling off at 10:15, the creak of Gary's footsteps crossing the guest room above the kitchen, the eventual silence that meant he had gone to bed. It was past midnight when the basement door opened again. These footsteps were lighter than Monica's evening routine. Faster. The kind of footsteps that belong to someone who has made a decision and is moving before they can unmake it. I was on my feet before she reached the bottom of the stairs, my hand flat on the table, every nerve in my body pulled tight. Monica looked nothing like the woman who had brought me soup 3 hours ago. Her hair was loose uncombed. She had changed out of her cardigan into an old sweatshirt that was too big for her. Brandon's, I realized with a jolt from the Seattle Mariners logo, faded across the chest. Her eyes were red-rimmed and swollen, and her hands were pressed together in front of her, like she was trying to hold herself in one piece by sheer force. She crossed to the far corner of the basement to the utility shelf where the old paint cans sat. She stopped there and turned to face me, pressing her back against the cold concrete wall. "The listening device," she whispered, "covers the center of the room. Not this corner. Gary checks it every morning, but he doesn't move it. I've had 6 months to learn his patterns." I walked to the corner. I kept my voice as low as hers. "How long have you known about it?" "Since the beginning." Her chin trembled. She pressed her lips together hard, fighting for control, and lost. The tears came fast and ugly, the kind that have been held back too long, her shoulders shaking one hand, flying up to cover her mouth, a sound escaping her that she clearly had not intended to make. "I'm so sorry, Arthur. I am so sorry. I didn't know how to tell you without him finding out." "Tell me now," I said. "All of it." She pressed the back of her wrist against her eyes and pulled herself upright, with visible effort. The way people do when falling apart is a luxury they cannot currently afford. "Brandon contacted me 14 months ago." She began, her voice raw and unsteady. "I hadn't heard from him in years. I knew he was alive. I had known for a long time, longer than I should have stayed quiet about it. He sent money for Laura's college, anonymous transfers, but I knew. A mother always knows where the money comes from when no one else is supposed to." She exhaled shakily. "He told me you had started asking questions about the insurance accounts, about Richard's estate. He said you were becoming confused, that the grief had finally caught up with you, that you needed supervised care before you hurt yourself. And you believed him." Her face crumpled. I wanted to believe him. I wanted there to be an explanation that wasn't what I knew it actually was. She pressed both hands flat against the wall behind her, steadying herself. "Laura is 22. She's in nursing school. Everything she has, her tuition, her apartment, her future, it all runs through accounts that Brandon controls. He didn't say it directly. He never says anything directly. But I understood what would happen to her if I didn't cooperate." "Laura?" I turned the name over carefully. I had not seen my granddaughter in nearly 3 years, not since a Christmas visit that had been cut short for reasons Monica had explained in ways that never quite added up. 22 years old in nursing school, her future held in her father's hands like a card he was deciding whether to play. "The man upstairs," I said. "Gary." Monica nodded tightly. "He arrived 6 weeks after you moved down here. Brandon sent him. He told me Gary was for security for the neighborhood. But Gary doesn't watch the neighborhood. He watches me. He reads my messages. He checks the listening device every morning at 7 and every evening at 9. Her voice dropped even lower. "He cut the phone line in the kitchen the second week he was here. I watched him do it from the hallway. He used a pair of kitchen scissors and he smiled while he did it, Arthur, like it was nothing." My jaw tightened. "Does he know about the note in the medication?" "No." She shook her head hard, wiping her face with the sleeve of the sweatshirt. "That took me 3 months to figure out how to do without him noticing. The capsule supplier, the paper, the timing, I had to be so careful. Gary monitors the grocery orders. I had to bring the materials in through Laura's visits, piece by piece, hidden inside her nursing textbooks." Her voice broke on the last word, and she pressed her knuckles against her mouth until she could speak again. "My daughter has been smuggling paper into this house in her textbooks, so I could write a note small enough to fit inside a capsule. Do you understand what I'm telling you? We have been planning this for months." The weight of that landed on me like something physical. I had spent 8 months believing I was entirely alone. I had eaten cold soup and watched the ceiling and told myself that the people above me were a unified machine with one purpose. And this woman had been standing in the kitchen directly over my head, hiding pieces of paper in her daughter's textbooks, learning Gary's schedule down to the minute, waiting for the right moment to reach me. "There's something else," Monica said. Her voice had changed. The tears were not gone, but they had been pushed back by something harder. "The facility they're sending you to, Sunny Meadows, it's not a standard care home." She reached into the front pocket of her sweatshirt and pulled out a folded piece of paper, then pressed it into my hands. "I found this in the filing cabinet in the home office 2 weeks ago. Gary doesn't know I've seen it." I unfolded the paper in the dim light. It was a contract. Formal letterhead legal terminology laid out in columns the way documents look when they are designed to be difficult to read quickly. But 30 years in forensic accounting means you learn to go straight to 3 things: the date, the signatory, and the termination clause. My eyes found the date. 3 months ago. Not last week, not after I had shouted at the television tonight. 3 months ago, this contract had been signed by a legal representative of someone identified only as W. Thorne, authorizing the involuntary transfer of one Arthur James Brooks to the residential care facility known as Sunny Meadows, effective upon medical certification of cognitive decline. "He planned this before tonight," I said. "The broadcast was never about you seeing him," Monica whispered, her voice tight with barely controlled fury. "He chose tonight because the ceremony was already scheduled. The van was already booked. You seeing his face on that screen, that was just careless on Gary's part. Brandon assumed you'd be asleep." I stood very still and looked at the contract in my hands. 25 years ago, my son had walked out of my life and built an empire on the story of his own death. And 3 months ago, before I had any idea he was alive, he had already signed the paperwork to make sure I disappeared. "Monica," I said quietly, "how much time do we have?" She looked at me, her red-rimmed eyes steady now, in a way that cost her something. "The van comes tomorrow morning," she said. "Early." I did not sleep. I sat at the folding table until the furnace cycled off for the last time, at 4 in the morning, and then I sat in the cold, and I thought. Not the way I had been thinking for 8 months, circular, exhausted, the same grief wearing a groove into the same ground, but the way I used to think when a set of financial records landed on my desk with something wrong buried inside them. Methodical, patient, one number at a time. By the time the gray light began to push through the basement window, I had a list, not written down. A man living under surveillance learns quickly that paper is a liability. But I held the list in my head the way I had held thousands of figures over 30 years, clearly in order, each item connected to the next, by a thread of logic I could follow backward if I needed to. First, the telephone. Monica had told me Gary cut the kitchen line, but this was a house I had owned for 38 years. I had run the original phone wiring myself in 1987, 2 spools of cable and a Saturday afternoon, while Ellen supervised from the porch with a glass of iced tea. There were 3 junction points in the house. Gary would have cut the most obvious one, the handset in the kitchen, but junction points 2 and 3 were in the utility closet off the hallway and behind the water heater in the basement corner. I crossed to the water heater before the light was fully up. The access panel came off in my hands the same way it always had, 2 screws and a firm pull. Behind it, running along the baseboard in a conduit I had installed myself, was the secondary phone line I had added in 1994 when I converted the basement into a home office. My fingers found the junction box. I pressed the connector. Then I pressed it again. Nothing. Not even static. I crouched there with my hand inside the wall and understood that Gary had not cut the obvious line. Gary had cut all of them. Someone had been thorough enough to trace every wire in this house before I ever knew what was happening, which meant Gary Vance was not a man Brandon had hired in a hurry. He was someone who had been briefed carefully, given a floor plan, told exactly where to look. I replaced the panel and stood up slowly, my knees protesting the cold. The basement door at the top of the stairs was unlocked. It was always unlocked because the lock that mattered was not on the door. It was Gary's presence in the house, his schedule, his eyes. I had tested the door twice in the first weeks and found it open both times. Open doors in a monitored space are more effective than locked ones. A locked door tells a man he is a prisoner. An open door makes him wonder if he is imagining things. I was done wondering. I went up the stairs. The kitchen was empty, but recently used a coffee mug. Still steaming on the counter, a chair pushed back from the table at an angle that suggested someone had left it quickly. The hallway beyond was quiet. I moved to the phone on the kitchen wall, the old landline with the long cord that Ellen had refused to replace even after cell phones made it redundant. I lifted the receiver. Dead air. Not even a dial tone. Cut clean. I was setting it back when I heard the floor creak behind me. "Mr. Brooks." Gary Vance filled the kitchen doorway, the way large men sometimes fill spaces, not just physically, but atmospherically, as if the room had to rearrange itself to accommodate him. He was perhaps 50 thick through the chest and shoulders, with a face that had the particular blankness of someone who has learned to keep their expressions professionally neutral. He was already dressed dark pants, a gray-collared shirt, work boots that looked like they had never been worn for anything as innocent as yard work. He was holding his own coffee mug and looking at me with the calm, assessing patience of a man who was not surprised to find me standing in his kitchen. "You're up early," he said. It was not a question. "Couldn't sleep," I said. "Old age." He looked at the telephone on the wall. Then he looked at me. He did not say anything about the telephone. He did not need to. His eyes moved from the receiver to my face and back again in a way that communicated everything without requiring a single word. He knew exactly what I had just tried, and he wanted me to know that he knew. "Monica's making breakfast at 7, he said. "You should head back downstairs." "I wanted some water," I said. He crossed the kitchen to the cabinet above the sink, took down a glass, filled it from the tap, and held it out to me. The gesture was perfectly calibrated, helpful on the surface, controlling underneath. He had put himself between me and the hallway, between me and the front door, between me and every exit I could see from where I was standing. I took the glass, I drank. I kept my eyes on his face, and my face arranged in the expression of a tired old man who was grateful for the water. "Thank you, Gary," I said. "Of course." He smiled then briefly, and it was the smile of someone who has decided to be magnanimous because they have already won. "You know, Mr. Brooks, I think you're going to like Sunny Meadows. The facility has a garden. They do activities." He said it gently. That was the worst part. He said it the way you tell someone something for their own good, and the kindness in his voice was so precisely manufactured that for a moment I felt the ground shift beneath me, the way it had in those first terrible months, the months when I had started to wonder whether I actually was losing my mind. I held the glass with both hands and looked at him steadily. "I'm sure it's lovely," I said. He nodded once and stepped aside just enough to let me pass back toward the basement stairs. Not far enough to suggest he trusted me, far enough to make the invitation clear. I went back down the stairs with the glass of water in my hand. Behind me, I heard him set his coffee mug down on the counter. Then I heard something else, quiet and methodical, the sound of him checking the window latch above the sink. Then the back door handle. Then the utility closet off the hallway, checking his perimeter. Just like he did every morning. I sat back down at the folding table and listened to him move through the house above me, and I thought about what Monica had told me the night before. "He arrived 6 weeks after you moved down here. Brandon sent him." Brandon had not sent Gary Vance to watch me. Brandon had sent Gary Vance to watch everything. And tomorrow morning, a white van from Sunny Meadows was going to pull up to this house, and Gary Vance was going to open the front door and smile that same manufactured smile, and if I did not find a way out before, then I was going to disappear into a facility where no one who mattered would ever think to look for me. I set the water glass down carefully. Then I heard Monica's footsteps cross the kitchen above my head, and her voice low and close to the floor near the basement door. "Tonight. I'll explain everything tonight." Monica came down at 9:10. I knew it was her before she reached the third step, because Gary's footsteps were heavier and slower, the walk of a man who moved like he owned every floor he crossed. Monica moved differently tonight. Quicker than her usual careful pace, one hand braced against the stairwell wall, the other pressed flat against something tucked under her arm. I was already standing. She crossed directly to the utility corner without a word, the same corner we had used the night before, the dead spot the listening device could not reach. She was wearing the same oversized sweatshirt. Her hair was pulled back tightly, and her face had the particular look of someone who has spent an entire day performing normalcy, while something inside them is quietly coming apart at the seams. She pulled the document from under her arm and held it out to me with both hands the way you hand someone, something you are not sure they are ready to receive. "I found this 2 weeks ago," she whispered. "In the filing cabinet in the home office, top drawer behind the insurance folders. Gary reorganized that cabinet when he first arrived. I think he forgot I knew where everything was before he got here. I took the document. It was 4 pages folded once down the center, printed on paper, heavy enough to mean business. The letterhead at the top read, Hargrove and Associates Legal Counsel, Seattle, Washington. Below that, in the formatted language that lawyers use when they want something to sound inevitable, was a transfer authorization. The language was dense, but I had spent 30 years reading documents designed to obscure what they actually said. And I went straight to the 3 things that matter in any contract: the date, the signatory, and what happens at the end. The date hit me first, August 19th, 3 months ago, almost to the day. My chest tightened so hard, I had to press my free hand flat against the utility shelf to stay upright. August 19th. I had not seen a television broadcast until last night. I had not shouted Brandon's name, or knocked a spoon off a table, or given anyone any reason to accelerate any plan until 11:57 the previous evening. And yet, on August 19th, someone sitting in a legal office in Seattle had already signed the paperwork to have me removed from my own home and placed in a residential care facility against my will. I kept reading. The signatory on behalf of the transferring party was listed as W. Thorne, represented by Hargrove and Associates. The receiving facility was Sunny Meadows Residential Care, Olympia, Washington. The authorization was contingent upon medical certification of cognitive decline as determined by an evaluating physician. I found the physician's name on page 3. Dr. Thomas Sterling, M.D. Board, Certified Psychiatrist, Private Practice, Bellevue, Washington. I looked up at Monica. Has this doctor ever examined me? Her jaw tightened. She shook her head once hard. Has he ever been in this house? No. Her voice was barely audible. I've never seen him. I looked him up after I found the contract. His practice website lists him as a consultant for elder care transitions. He has no public patient reviews, no hospital affiliations I could find. She pressed her lips together. Arthur, in the state of Washington. Involuntary placement in a residential care facility requires a formal psychiatric evaluation conducted in person by a licensed physician. It has to be documented, witnessed, and filed with the county court before any transfer can be legally authorized. I knew this. 30 years of forensic accounting means you learn the legal frameworks that surround money, and money is always involved when someone wants to move an elderly person out of their home and into a facility. The process exists specifically to prevent what was happening to me. Right now, a family member, or in this case someone pretending to be one, arranging an involuntary transfer based on fabricated medical documentation. He signed this without ever seeing me, I said. Which means the certification is fraudulent, Monica said. Which means the contract is built on a false foundation. Which means the document itself is evidence of a crime. I set the pages down on the shelf with hands that were not entirely steady. Medical fraud, conspiracy to commit unlawful restraint, filing false documentation with a care facility. I looked at her. Monica, do you understand what you're holding? For a moment, she simply stared at me, and then her eyes filled, and she pressed both fists against her mouth and made a sound that was not quite crying and not quite a word, something in between, something that had been waiting a long time to come out. Her shoulders shook hard twice before she got herself back under control, pulling in a long breath through her nose, blinking rapidly. I was afraid to do anything with it, she whispered. Gary goes through my phone. He monitors the email on the home computer. I couldn't contact a lawyer. I couldn't call anyone. I kept it. I didn't know what else to do with it except keep it and wait. You did the right thing, I said. Did I? Her voice cracked on the second word. Arthur, I kept this piece of paper for 2 weeks while you were sitting down here eating soup, and I said nothing. I brought you your medication every night knowing what was in it, and I said nothing for 2 weeks because I was terrified of what Gary would do if he found out I had it. Tears ran freely down her face now, and she did not bother wiping them. I am not a brave person. I want you to know that. I have not been brave about any of this. I looked at this woman who had hidden paper in her daughter's nursing textbooks and written notes small enough to fit inside a capsule, and learned Gary's schedule down to the minute, all while living in the same house as him, cooking his meals, exchanging careful pleasantries in the kitchen every morning. Monica, I said quietly. Brave people and people who are terrified look exactly the same from the outside. The only difference is what they do anyway. She wiped her face with the back of her hand. Her chin was still trembling. I looked back at the contract. August 19th. Brandon had signed this 3 months before last night's broadcast, which meant the ceremony, the choice of date, the public declaration of his rebirth, none of it had been careless. He had scheduled his celebration and my disappearance on the same calendar months in advance, with the precision of a man who had learned long ago that timing was everything. He had not been showing off when he chose my birthday. He had been closing a door. I folded the contract carefully and held it against my chest. "We have one night," I said. "After that van arrives, I don't get to tell anyone what I know." Monica straightened. She wiped her face one final time and looked at me with eyes that were red and wet, but suddenly underneath all of that, completely clear. "Then we use the night," she said. I heard the engine before I saw the lights. It was the low diesel rumble of a large vehicle moving slowly, the kind of sound that does not belong on a residential street at 6:40 in the morning. I was already sitting upright on the cot, fully dressed shoes, tied the folded contract tucked inside my shirt against my chest. I had not slept. Monica and I had talked in the utility corner until past 2 in the morning, and after she went upstairs, I had spent the remaining hours doing what I had always done when a problem was larger than I knew how to solve. I broke it into pieces small enough to carry. The headlights swept across the basement window in a slow arc. A white van. Long-bodied, no markings except a small logo on the passenger door. I could not read from where I was standing. It rolled to a stop at the curb directly in front of the house, and the engine cut off. And for approximately 4 seconds, the street was completely silent. Then I heard Gary's boots hit the floor upstairs. He was moving faster than I had ever heard him move, crossing the hallway, taking the stairs down in 3 heavy impacts. The front door opened. I heard voices on the porch. Gary's low and professional, another man's clipped and businesslike, the two of them running through a checklist the way people do when they have done something many times before and have stopped thinking of it as anything other than a procedure. My mouth went dry. I pressed my back against the wall beside the basement stairs and listened. 2 men from the facility, maybe 3. Gary, between them and me. The front door still open. Every second I stood here was a second the distance between me and that van was getting shorter. Then I heard it. From the kitchen directly above my head, a sharp crack, a clatter of metal against tile, and Gary's voice cutting off mid-sentence and rising into something raw and startled. "What the, Monica? What are you—" "I'm so sorry." Monica's voice came through the floor, high and trembling, exactly the right register of a woman who has just had a terrible accident. "Gary, I'm so sorry I didn't see you there. Let me get a towel. Please sit down." The voices from the porch surged. Footsteps rushed into the kitchen. 3 sets at least, maybe 4, all converging on the same point above my head, all focused on whatever had just happened to Gary Vance in the kitchen with a pot of boiling water. I was already moving. I took the basement stairs 2 at a time, my hand barely touching the railing. The hallway was empty. The front door was still open, cold morning air pushing through it, and I could see the white van at the curb, and one of the facility workers' jackets draped over the porch railing where he had left it when he rushed inside. I did not go toward the front door. I turned left. The back door at the end of the hallway had a brass knob I had installed myself in, 1991. The deadbolt above it was the original hardware, a Schlage lock that I had carried the key to for 38 years. Gary had that key now. Gary had all the keys. But the door swung open when I turned the knob. Monica had broken the bolt plate off the doorframe sometime in the night. I could see the raw wood where the screws had been, 3 small wounds in the painted white frame. She had done it quietly enough that Gary had not heard, and she had done it so that when I reached this door in the 6 or 8 seconds between her dropping that pot and the house coming back under control, there would be nothing between me and the outside. The morning air hit me like cold water. The backyard was narrow and long, the way yards are in older Seattle neighborhoods, bordered on 3 sides by a cedar fence that had been there since before I bought the house. 6 feet high. The latch on the back gate had rusted shut 2 summers ago, and I had meant to fix it and never had, which meant the gate was not an option. I went for the fence. I am 71 years old. I want to be clear about what it costs a 71-year-old man to throw his body at a 6-foot cedar fence at 6:45 in the morning after a night without sleep. My arms found the top rail and my shoulders screamed. My left knee struck the second plank going up and sent a bolt of pain through my leg so sharp that my vision went white at the edges. I hung there for what felt like a very long time, half over and half. Not my chest heaving, my fingers going numb against the damp wood. From inside the house, Gary's voice rose, still pained, still off balance, but sharpening back into something focused and alert. I pushed. I went over the top and came down hard on the other side, landing on my right shoulder in the narrow strip of gravel between my fence and my neighbor's. The impact knocked the air out of me completely. I lay there for 2 seconds, staring up at a gray November sky, every part of my body registering its objection, and then I heard the back door of my house bang open against the wall. I got up. I do not know precisely how. Muscle memory, maybe, or the particular stubbornness of a man who has decided he is not finished yet. My right shoulder throbbed in a way that would matter later. My knee was stiff and unhappy. I straightened up in the gravel, pressed one hand against my neighbor's fence to steady myself, and took 3 long breaths. Then I walked to the end of the narrow passage and stepped out onto the sidewalk. 43 years in this neighborhood. I knew every block within a mile in every direction. I knew which streets had cameras and which ones did not, which corners had coffee shops that opened at 6, and which had bus stops with benches where a man could sit without drawing attention. I knew this city the way you know, a place when you have walked it in grief, and in ordinary happiness, and in every weather when it has been the backdrop of your entire adult life. I turned north, and I walked. Behind me, I heard Gary's voice from somewhere near the back fence, tight and controlled, and carrying just enough urgency to tell me he had not yet decided whether to make a scene in the neighbor's yard. I did not look back. My right shoulder hurt with every step. My knee was going to stiffen up badly within the hour. I had no phone, no wallet, no identification, and $43 in cash that Monica had pressed into my palm at 2 in the morning when we said goodbye in the utility corner. But I was outside. For the first time in 8 months, I was outside, and the cold air on my face felt like the first honest thing I had felt in a very long time. I made it half a block before I stopped. The sidewalk was empty this early, just a dog walker far ahead, and the distant sound of a garbage truck working its way through the next street over. My shoulder throbbed with every step. My knee had stiffened exactly the way I knew it would, pulling tight on the downswing with each stride, like a hinge that needed oil. The $43 in my pocket was enough to get me somewhere, but not far enough to matter, and I had nothing, no identification, no proof of who I was, or what I knew, nothing that would make a stranger or a lawyer or a police officer take me seriously for more than 30 seconds. What I did have was a house, my house. 38 years of my life inside those walls, and somewhere on the second floor in the office I had built, when Brandon was still in grade school, was a floor model Mosler safe I had purchased in 1989 and never once moved. Inside it were the things I had kept, because I could not bring myself to throw them away. Financial records correspondence, a life's worth of paper that meant nothing to anyone else and everything to me, including, if my memory served, the original police evidence receipt from 1999. The document returning to me after the investigation closed one birthday cake receipt found in the front seat of my son's abandoned car. I turned around. The side of the house faced a narrow passage between my property and the Hendersons next door. The Hendersons had moved away 4 years ago, and the new owners kept to themselves, which meant the passage was unobserved. I knew exactly where to put my hands and where to put my feet, because I had climbed this route before years ago when I locked myself out and refused to call a locksmith on principle. It cost me more than it used to. By the time I pulled myself through the office window and got both feet on the floor, I was breathing hard enough that I had to stand still for a full minute with my hands on my knees. The office smelled of old paper and dust and the particular stillness of a room that has not been used in a long time. The desk was where I had left it. The bookshelves were where I had left them. Someone had gone through the filing cabinet. The drawers were not quite closed, the folders inside them rearranged with the slightly off alignment of hands that did not know the original order. Gary's work, cataloging, looking for exactly the kind of thing I was here to find. I crossed to the far corner where the Mosler sat behind the bookshelf. My fingers moved through it without thought, the way fingers do when something has been done 10,000 times. The tumblers turned. The door swung open. I was reaching inside when the bedroom door across the hall opened. I straightened up and turned around. She was standing in the hallway in scrub pants and a gray sweatshirt, her dark hair pulled back in a hurried ponytail, a travel mug in one hand and her phone in the other. She was 22 years old. The last time I had seen her, she was 19, and sitting across from me at a Christmas table, and I had thought then that she had Monica's eyes and Brandon's cheekbones and her own particular quality of stillness that belonged to neither of them. She looked nothing like that girl now. She looked like someone who had learned to be careful. We stared at each other across 6 feet of hallway carpet, and for a moment, neither of us moved. Her travel mug tilted slightly in her loosening grip. Her eyes moved from my face to the open safe behind me, to the window I had come through, still unlatched the curtain, moving in the cold morning air. Something crossed her expression that I recognized because I had felt it myself the night before last. The specific vertigo of the world rearranging itself around a fact you were not prepared for. Grandpa, her voice came out thin and careful, like she was testing the word to see if it still fit. They said you were Gary told me you were having an episode, that you ran outside and, Laura. I kept my voice low and even. I need you to put the phone down. Her hand tightened around it instead. She took one step back. I'm not going to hurt you, I said. The words came out with a heaviness I had not anticipated, because I should not have had to say them. I was her grandfather. She had sat on my lap at age 4 and fallen asleep during a Mariners game, and I had carried her to the guest room and covered her with the quilt Ellen made. I should not have had to stand in my own hallway and tell my granddaughter I was not a threat, but I said it again anyway. Laura, I am not going to hurt you. I need 60 seconds. She raised the phone. Her thumb moved to the screen. I watched her unlock it and navigate to her contacts with practice speed, and I saw the name she landed on before she pressed call. The contact was saved simply as William, not Dad, not Father. William, she had known. On some level, in the way that children know things, even when they have been carefully taught not to know them, she had known that the man who sent anonymous money and asked careful questions about her grandfather's health was not simply a family friend. Laura, I said, and I did not try to keep the weight out of my voice this time. Please, before you make that call, let me show you one thing. Her thumb hovered over the call button. Her eyes were bright and conflicted, and I could see the war going on behind them, the version of events she had been given, pressing up against something older and more instinctive, the part of her that remembered who I was before anyone started explaining me to her. One thing, I said, 60 seconds. If you still want to make that call after that, I won't stop you. The travel mug in her other hand was shaking now, coffee trembling close to the edge of the lid. Her jaw was set hard in the way Monica's jaw set when she was holding something difficult together by willpower alone. She lowered the phone 2 inches. It was not agreement. It was not trust. But it was a pause, and a pause was all I needed. The safe, I said quietly. Come look at what's inside it. Laura did not move toward the safe. She stood in the hallway with her phone still in her hand and watched me cross the room, and I could feel her measuring the distance between herself and the bedroom door behind her, calculating in the way that young people do when they have been told to be afraid of something and are now standing in the same room as it. I did not rush her. I reached into the Mosler and found what I was looking for without having to search. It was in a manila envelope I had labeled in my own handwriting 25 years ago. 3 words in black marker across the front. Brandon Police Return. The envelope was soft with age, the edges worn where I had taken it out, and put it back more times than I could count, in the years when I still believed that holding it meant holding some part of him. I carried it to the desk and set it down. Come here, I said. Please. She came, slowly stopping just inside the doorway with one shoulder still angled toward the hall, but she came. She set her travel mug on the corner of the desk and held her phone against her chest with both hands. And she looked at the envelope, the way people look at things they already half know are going to change something. I opened the flap and took out the receipt. It was a standard register printout, the thermal paper kind, slightly yellowed along the edges, but perfectly legible. The header read, Patton's Bakery, Kirkland, Washington. Below that, a single line item, birthday cake, custom 9-inch white frosting. The total was $14.60. And at the very bottom of the slip in the small font that cash registers use for date and time stamps was the number that had never left my memory in 25 years. November 14th, 8:57 p.m. I set the receipt on the desk in front of Laura and placed my finger beneath the timestamp. Your father left this house at 6:30 in the evening, I said. I remember exactly because I watched him go from the kitchen window. He was wearing the gray jacket, the one with the broken zipper on the left pocket that he kept meaning to fix. He waved once at the end of the driveway. That was the last time I saw his face in person. I tapped the timestamp. The bakery was 11 minutes from this house. A 9-inch custom cake does not require 2 hours and 27 minutes to purchase Laura. She looked at the receipt. Her face had gone very still. The car was found at 9:43 p.m. at the Kirkland Marina parking lot. I continued. Unlocked. The cake was in the back seat box, closed undamaged. The police noted that the purchase time on the receipt was inconsistent with the timeline, but Brandon had been reported missing by then, and the investigation moved in a different direction. I paused. They gave me this receipt when they closed the case. They said it was personal property. I have kept it in that safe for 25 years because I did not know what else to do with it. Laura picked up the receipt with 2 fingers the way you handle something fragile. She held it close to her face and read the timestamp herself, her lips moving slightly. The phone in her other hand had gone completely forgotten. 2 hours and 27 minutes, she said. Her voice came out stripped of everything except the fact itself, flat and precise, like she was reading a figure from a textbook she did not yet understand the implications of. He bought the cake first, I said. Then he went somewhere else for 2 hours and 27 minutes. Then he left the car at the marina. The investigation assumed he had gone into the water. They searched for 9 days. I kept my voice even, because if I did not keep it even, it was going to break, and I could not afford to break right now. Not here, not in front of her. There was no body. There was never a body. Laura set the receipt down on the desk very carefully, as though it might shatter. Then she sat down on the floor. Not in a chair, not on the edge of the desk, on the floor, straight down her back against the bookshelf, and her knees pulled up and her travel mug somehow still upright beside her. She pressed one hand flat against the carpet and stared at the middle distance with an expression I recognized because I had worn it myself on November 15th, 1999, sitting in this same room after the police called to tell me my son was gone. It was the expression of a person whose internal architecture has just shifted on its foundation. The scholarship, I said quietly after a moment. The anonymous one, for nursing school. Her eyes moved to my face. Brandon sent you that money, I said. Didn't he? It was not a question. I had understood it the moment I saw the name William saved in her contacts. Not Dad, not Father William, the careful distance of a name that kept things manageable. You do not save your estranged father's alias in your phone as a first name unless you have been navigating that relationship with extreme care for a very long time. Laura's chin began to tremble. She pressed her lips together hard and looked at the ceiling the way people do when they are trying to decide whether to let something out or hold it in. He called me the first time when I was 18, she said. Her voice was barely above a whisper. He said he was a friend of the family. He said my grandfather had a history of confusion that was getting worse. He said my mother needed help managing the situation and that he was quietly providing financial support to keep things stable. She exhaled a long, shaking breath. I believed him. I was 18. He paid my first semester's tuition, and I believed him. He was patient, I said. He called every few months. He knew things about our family, specific things a stranger wouldn't know. It felt like he was... She stopped. Her jaw worked. It felt like he was looking out for us. She looked down at the receipt still sitting on the desk. Is that his handwriting on the envelope? She asked. No, I said. That's mine. She stared at it for another long moment. Then she pressed both hands over her face and made a sound that was not quite a sob and not quite a word, but something from much further down, from the place where a person keeps the things they have been quietly not thinking about for 4 years, because thinking about them was too much to hold. I sat down in the desk chair and waited, because sometimes the only useful thing you can do for someone is stay in the room. When she finally lowered her hands, her face was wet and her eyes were swollen, and she looked at me with an expression that had something new in it, not trust not yet, but the beginning of fury, the quiet, slow-building kind that takes a long time to arrive and then does not leave. The scholarship payment for next semester, she said. It clears in 3 weeks. I know, I said. She reached up and took the receipt from the desk and held it in both hands and looked at the timestamp one more time. Then she looked at me and said, What do you need me to do? Laura did not wait for me to answer. She was already moving before I finished processing her question, standing up from the floor in one motion, brushing the carpet from her scrubs, crossing to the desk, and pulling open the bottom drawer where Monica had kept her spare items for as long as I could remember. She knew exactly where to look, the way children know the geography of a house they grew up in, even after years of pretending otherwise. She came back with two things. The first was a credit card matte black with no logo on the front, the kind of card that does not advertise itself because it does not need to. She set it on the desk in front of me. "Mom's emergency card," she said. She told me 2 months ago that if anything happened, if I ever needed to move fast, to use this one and not the joint account. I didn't understand what she meant then. The second was a phone. A basic prepaid model still in its packaging, the kind sold at drugstore checkout counters for $39. "I bought this for myself 3 weeks ago," Laura said. "I don't know why exactly. It felt like something I might need." She set it beside the card and looked at me steadily. Her eyes still swollen, but her voice entirely level. "I activated it last night after Gary told me about your episode. I was going to call someone. I didn't know who." I looked at my granddaughter across the desk. She was 22 years old, and she had spent 4 years being carefully misled by a man she thought was looking out for her family, and she had still somehow, on instinct, bought a prepaid phone and kept her mother's emergency card in a drawer. She checked twice before telling me where it was. Whatever Brandon had tried to build inside her, he had not managed to dismantle the part that knew something was wrong. "Thank you," I said. The words felt insufficient, but they were what I had. I took the card and the phone, and I left through the front door. Gary's van was still in the side passage, which meant he had not yet circled back to check the front of the house, and I walked north at a pace that was not quite hurrying, but not quite ordinary either. The shoulder I had landed on coming over the fence had stiffened into a persistent low-grade ache that spread up the side of my neck when I turned my head. My knee was manageable. My mind was running well ahead of my body, the way it always did when the numbers started to line up. The Greyhound station was 14 blocks from the house. I had taken the bus from that station twice in my life, once when Ellen and I drove it for a weekend trip in 1978, and once when Richard needed a ride from Tacoma at 2 in the morning, and I did not want to take the car. I knew the route. I knew the building. I knew that the ticket counter opened at 7:30, and that there was a bank of payment terminals along the east wall where a person could purchase a ticket without speaking to anyone. I reached the station at 8:12. The terminal accepted card payments. I inserted the black card and navigated to the Seattle departures, 3 buses before noon, the first at 9:15. I selected a seat, moved to the payment screen, and pressed confirm. The screen went blank. Then it came back with 2 words in red: transaction declined. I stood at the terminal and looked at those 2 words for the 3 seconds it took my mind to shift from confusion into something colder and more focused. A card declined at a payment terminal means one of 3 things: insufficient funds, an expired card, or a block placed on the account by someone with authorization to do so. Monica's emergency card was not a debit card with a balance limit. It was a credit line. It did not decline because of insufficient funds. Someone had blocked it. The prepaid phone in my jacket pocket buzzed once. I took it out. There was a text message from a number I did not recognize. No area code, I knew no name, attached just 11 digits and 3 lines of text that appeared on the screen, with the casual precision of a man who has been expecting this moment for some time. The password on that card is your birthday, Father. November 14th. I said it myself when I set up your daughter-in-law's accounts 18 months ago. Thank you for using it at the Greyhound station on 4th Avenue. I now know exactly where you are. Have a safe trip. I read the message once. Then I read it again. William Thorne Brandon had structured Monica's finances the way a careful architect structures a building with load-bearing elements that looked like conveniences but were actually controls. He had set the password on her emergency card himself. He had chosen my birthday, November 14th, because he knew that if I ever found that card and tried to use it, the date would mean nothing suspicious to me. It would just feel like a coincidence, the kind of small overlap that families accumulate over decades. It was not a coincidence. It was a trap built 24 months in advance, waiting patiently for me to walk into it. My chest tightened, but my hands stayed still. 30 years of forensic accounting teaches you something about the moment you realize you have been outmaneuvered. It teaches you not to react to it the way your body wants to react, not to grip the terminal or raise your voice or make any outward gesture that tells the other party they have landed where they aimed. You breathe. You assess the actual damage. You determine what the other party now knows versus what they think they know. Brandon knew I was at the Greyhound station on 4th Avenue. He did not know what I had in the manila envelope tucked inside my jacket beside the phone. He did not know that Laura was no longer his. He did not know about the contract with Dr. Sterling's forged signature that Monica had been carrying for 2 weeks. He knew my location, that was all. I pocketed the phone and stepped away from the terminal. The station was filling up morning commuters, a family with 2 small children, and an enormous amount of luggage, an older woman reading a paperback in the row of plastic seats along the window. Normal. Ordinary. A Thursday morning in November. I walked to the east wall and looked up at the television mounted in the corner above the departure board. It was showing a local news broadcast. Weather traffic, a segment about a city council vote. Then the anchor's expression shifted, the particular shift of someone transitioning to a breaking story, and the lower third of the screen filled with a photograph. It was my face, my driver's license photo, 4 years old, slightly washed out by the reproduction. Beside it, text in bold, missing person / vulnerable adult, Arthur Brooks, 71. Believed confused and potentially dangerous. If seen, do not approach. Contact authorities. The woman with the paperback looked up at the screen. Then she looked around the station with the alert, helpful expression of someone who has just been given a civic responsibility. I turned away before she could complete the turn toward me. My heart was hammering against my ribs, but my pace when I moved toward the exit was measured and unhurried. An old man heading outside for some air, nothing more. I kept my chin slightly down. I moved past a family, past the ticket counter, past the glass doors, and out into the cold morning. 1 block north, left on the side street. Into the shadow of the parking garage on the corner. I pressed my back against the concrete wall and breathed. Brandon had moved faster than I expected. The card transaction had taken less than 4 minutes to trigger a media response, which meant he did not have people making calls. He had systems. Automated systems connected to payment terminals and broadcast networks waiting for exactly this kind of input to fire. This was not a man reacting to me. This was infrastructure built and maintained over years, designed for the specific purpose of containing Arthur Brooks, should Arthur Brooks ever become a problem. I looked down at the prepaid phone in my hand, then I looked at the Rolex on my wrist. Ellen had given it to me on our 20th anniversary. I had worn it every day since. It was the most valuable object I owned, and also at this particular moment, the most liquid. There was a pawn shop 2 blocks east. I had walked past it 100 times. I pushed off the wall and started moving. The first rule of moving through a city when your face is on television is to change the silhouette. Not the faces are secondary. What security cameras catch at distance, what witnesses remember in passing, is the overall shape of a person, the height, the posture, the color and bulk of what they are wearing. A 71-year-old man in a dark wool coat walking upright with a slight rightward lean from a bad shoulder is a recognizable configuration. Change the coat, change the lean, change the pace, and you change what people see before they have time to look closely enough to see you. I had $43 and I had been walking this neighborhood for 4 decades. There was a Goodwill donation center 3 blocks south of the parking garage, the kind of storefront that opens at 8 and does most of its business before noon. I went in through the front door with my chin down and my collar up and found what I needed in under 4 minutes. A canvas barn jacket in olive green, 2 sizes too large, $4.50. A navy wool watch cap, the kind fishermen wear, $1.75. A canvas tote bag with a public library logo, on the side free in the bin by the register, because no one wanted it. I paid in cash. I did not look up at the woman behind the counter. She did not look up from her phone. In the bathroom at the back of the store, I put on the jacket over my own coat, which immediately changed my silhouette from slight to broad. I pulled the watch cap down to my eyebrows. The Rolex went from my left wrist into the inside pocket of my own coat, underneath the barn jacket, where it created no outline. I transferred the manila envelope, the contract, and the prepaid phone from my outer pockets to the tote bag, and hung the tote bag on my right shoulder so the logo faced out. I looked at myself in the mirror above the sink. What looked back at me was an old man running errands on a Thursday morning. Not a missing person, not a vulnerable adult, not Arthur James Brooks, 71, believed confused and potentially dangerous. Just a man in an olive jacket with a library bag, the kind of man who exists in every American city in such abundance that the eye slides right past him without catching. Good enough? I went out through the back. Moving through Seattle when you know it, the way I knew it, is an exercise in using the city's own architecture against the people looking for you. I knew which intersections had mounted cameras and which relied only on storefront security that pointed inward. I knew that the block between 5th and 6th along the commercial strip had a continuous awning that ran the full length of the buildings and blocked the sightline from the traffic cameras on the corner poles. I knew that the alley behind the restaurant row on Pike ran parallel to the main street for 4 blocks and connected to the service entrance of the parking structure on the far end. I moved through it all the way. Water moves through a landscape it has shaped over years, finding the low routes, the covered routes, the routes that other people do not think to use because they have never had a reason to. The news broadcast had called me potentially dangerous. I thought about that as I walked. Potentially dangerous. The phrase had a specific legal meaning in the context of a missing adult alert. It authorized members of the public to maintain distance and contact authorities rather than intervening directly. And it authorized law enforcement to approach with a higher level of caution than a standard wellness check. It was language designed to make me untouchable, to ensure that any ordinary person who recognized me would call a number rather than speak to me, and that any officer who found me would have procedural justification for immediate detention. Brandon had not put my face on television because he was worried about me. He had put my face on television because he needed me contained before I reached anyone who would listen to me. And the alert was not issued by local police, I knew that, because local police did not move that fast, not for a missing elderly man who had been gone for less than 2 hours, not without a formal report filed and processed through the proper channels. This had come from somewhere else. Some system that Brandon's organization had access to, something that could push an image and a designation into the broadcast network faster than any legitimate law enforcement agency could. That was a federal crime. Interfering with public broadcast emergency systems was prosecuted by the FCC and the Department of Justice, both with penalties that ran to significant prison time. Brandon had committed it casually as a Tuesday morning operational necessity, which told me something important about how many times he had done something like this before. I kept moving. The shoulder ache had settled into something I could work around, a persistent pull on the right side that I compensated for by keeping the tote bag on that shoulder and letting the weight distribute the tension. My knee had loosened slightly with movement, the way bad joints sometimes do, once they accept that they are going to be used regardless of their opinion. By 9:15, I had put 12 blocks between myself and the Greyhound station. I stopped at a corner and checked the prepaid phone. No new messages from Brandon's number, no calls. The silence felt intentional. He knew where I had been at 8:12, and he was waiting to see where I went next, which meant he expected me to use the card again, or the phone in a way he could track. I turned the phone off and put it in the bottom of the tote bag under the envelope. Moving dark, as the investigators used to say when I worked alongside them on financial crime cases. No electronic footprint, cash only, face down. The pawn shop was called Miller's Exchange. I had walked past it perhaps 100 times over the years and never gone inside. It occupied the ground floor of a narrow building on the corner of a block that had been commercial in the 70s and was now in the particular state of American urban transition that produces pawn shops and check cashing operations and very good cheap lunch counters. The sign in the window was hand-lettered. The display cases inside held the compressed biography of other people's difficult moments, cameras and jewelry and tools and instruments and watches, all the things that people carry in their pockets in good times and bring through this door in hard ones. I pushed the door open. A bell above it rang once. The man behind the counter was perhaps 65, broad through the shoulders, with close-cropped gray hair and the particular stillness of someone who spent most of their day watching people and had learned to do it without appearing to watch. He was cleaning the glass top of the display case with a cloth when I came in, and he looked up the way people look up in shops, briefly neutrally, the customer service version of acknowledgement. Then he looked again. His hand stopped moving on the cloth. He looked at my face for 3 full seconds, which is a very long time for a stranger to look at your face in a shop, long enough that the back of my neck went tight and I took an involuntary step toward the door I had just come through. He did not reach for a phone. He did not call out. He did not do any of the things I had been preparing myself for since the moment my face appeared on the television at the bus station. He set the cloth down on the counter very deliberately and said in a voice that was low and careful and carried something I had not heard from a stranger in 2 days. "Mr. Brooks, I was wondering when you'd come through that door." I did not move toward him. 25 years of being the person who unravels other people's deceptions teaches you that the most dangerous sentence in any room is the one that sounds like relief. A man who has been waiting for you, who knows your name before you have given it, who does not reach for a phone when your face has been on every television screen in the city for the past hour. That man is either the best thing that has happened to you today or the worst, and the distance between those two possibilities is not something you cross quickly. I kept one hand on the strap of the tote bag and the other at my side, and looked at him across 12 feet of display cases and did not say anything. He seemed to understand the hesitation. He set the cleaning cloth down on the counter and straightened up slowly, keeping both hands visible, the deliberate movement of someone who has dealt with frightened people before and knows that sudden gestures are a problem. "My name is Frank Miller," he said. "I was a detective with Seattle PD from 1991 to 2004. I handled the Brandon Brooks missing persons case in November of 1999. He paused. "I know who you are. I know what your face looks like on a television screen, and I know that what is on that television screen right now is not a legitimate law enforcement alert." The floor of the shop felt slightly unsteady beneath me, though I knew it was not the floor. "How?" I said, one word, all I had. "Because I filed 3 separate requests with the department in the 2 years after Brandon's case closed," Frank said. He reached under the counter and brought up a mug of coffee, drank from it, set it back down. 6 months after that, I took early retirement. I opened this shop because it is 2 blocks from the Greyhound station and 4 blocks from the bus line that runs past your street, and I have been here for 19 years, waiting for you to need to move through this part of the city on foot with no good options." I walked to the counter. My legs felt unsteady in a way that had nothing to do with the fence or the knee or the cold. I put both hands flat on the glass top of the display case and looked at this man, this retired detective who had spent 19 years running a pawn shop as a waiting room, and I felt something crack open in my chest that I did not have a name for yet. "You tried to reach me," I said, 4 times. His jaw tightened. 2 letters, 1 phone call, 1 visit to the house. The letters were never answered. The phone call was intercepted by someone who identified herself as your daughter-in-law and told me you were not well enough to receive outside contact. The visit, he stopped. The visit, a man came to the door, large, dark pants, gray shirt. He told me you were resting and asked me to leave my card. I left my card. I never heard back. Gary Vance, working the door of my house, intercepting my mail, running interference between me and the one person who had been trying to tell me the truth for nearly 2 decades. My hands pressed harder against the glass. "What did you find?" I asked. "In 1999. What made you file those requests?" Frank reached beneath the counter again and brought out a manila folder, brown with age, the edges soft from handling. He set it on the counter between us and opened it with the careful efficiency of someone who has opened it many times and knows exactly what is inside. "The insurance policy," he said, pointing to the first document. Brandon Brooks was listed as a beneficiary on a life insurance policy taken out in his name 18 months before his disappearance. The policy had a standard 2-year contestability period, meaning if the insured died within 2 years of the policy being issued, the company could contest the payout. He looked up at me. Brandon disappeared at 22 months, 2 months before the contestability period expired. I stared at the document. "I didn't know about that policy. It was taken out in his name, not yours. He was 20 years old, an adult. He did not need your signature." Frank turned to the next page. "The payout was $1.8 million. It cleared to an account in Brandon's name 30 days after the body was declared presumed dead by the county. A declaration that, by the way, required a judge's approval based on evidence that I found at the time to be insufficient. $1.8 million. I had known about an insurance payout. I had been told it was a small policy, a student policy, something Brandon had set up through the university. I had been told the money went into a trust. I had never seen the figure. I had never asked to see it because I had been a man drowning in grief, and the number did not matter to me at the time. The number mattered to me now. "There's more," Frank said. He turned to a 3rd page, a photocopy of a bank statement partially redacted, with several transactions highlighted in yellow marker. "In the 60 days before his disappearance, Brandon made 11 cash withdrawals from a joint savings account he shared with you. Total amount withdrawn $42,000. The withdrawals were structured to stay below the $10,000 federal reporting threshold. Structured withdrawals. In forensic accounting, that practice has a name. It is called smurfing, and it is a federal offense under the Bank Secrecy Act because deliberately breaking up transactions to avoid currency reporting requirements is considered evidence of financial concealment. A 21-year-old college student withdrawing $42,000 in structured increments in the months before his disappearance was not a grieving family member preparing for an emergency. He was a man preparing to run. He planned it for at least 2 years, I said. At minimum. Frank closed the folder and slid it across the counter toward me. I have kept this for 25 years because I knew that one day either you would walk through that door or someone connected to you would, and I needed to be ready to hand it to someone who could actually use it. I picked up the folder. It was lighter than it should have been for what it contained. There is something else, Frank said. His voice changed, flattened slightly the way voices do when the next thing they have to say is the thing they have been least looking forward to. Something I found in the supplemental reports filed separately from the main case file. About your other son. He held my gaze steadily. About Richard. The name landed in the room like a stone dropped into still water. I felt the ripples move outward from it and touch every wall. What about Richard? I said. Frank put both hands flat on the counter mirroring me and did not look away. The accident report listed brake failure as the probable cause, he said carefully. But there was a supplemental mechanical inspection conducted 6 weeks after the accident that found something inconsistent with standard brake wear. The inspector flagged it. The flag was not followed up. He paused. The supplemental report was filed 4 days after Brandon was declared presumed dead. By that point, the department had closed both cases and moved on. The room was very quiet. I could hear the traffic outside on the street. I could hear the refrigerator hum of the display cases. I could hear my own breathing, which had gone shallow and careful, the breathing of a man trying to take in something too large to fit. Are you telling me, I said, that Richard's accident? I am telling you, Frank said, that there are questions I was never able to get anyone to ask. He reached under the counter one more time and produced a business card, plain white with a name and a phone number. This is Arthur Wallace. He is a financial litigation attorney in Seattle. He is also one of the best I have ever seen. I have been holding that card for 11 years, waiting to give it to you. I took the card. My hand was shaking badly enough that I had to close my fingers around it to keep it still. Frank, I said. My voice came out rough and uneven, stripped of the careful steadiness I had been maintaining since the moment I climbed out of that basement window. Why didn't you... I stopped, started again. 25 years. He looked at me with an expression that held no apology and no deflection, just the plain, tired face of a man who had done what he could with what he had and knew that it had not been enough. I know, he said quietly. I know it wasn't enough, but you're here now, and so is everything I saved. Before I reveal the devastating discovery hidden inside that police file, please comment the word truth down below, so I know you are still here, standing with Arthur. Also, please note, the upcoming events include some fictional elements and may not be entirely grounded in fact. If you prefer not to listen further, feel free to turn off the video right here. I did not ask the question right away. I stood at the counter with Frank's business card for Arthur Wallace in my closed fist and the manila folder under my arm, and I looked at the display cases beneath my hands, a tray of wedding rings, a row of cameras, somebody's trumpet in a velvet-lined case, and I breathed, just breathed. Because I already knew in the way that you sometimes know a thing, before it is told to you, that what Frank was about to say about Richard was going to require me to be very still when I heard it. Tell me, I said finally. Frank pulled a second folder from beneath the counter. Thinner than the first, held together with a binder clip, the pages inside slightly out of alignment in the way of documents that have been read and reread many times without being formally organized. Richard was 28 years old when he died, Frank said. November 9th, 1999, 5 days before Brandon disappeared. He opened the folder to a page near the back, a photocopy of a mechanic's report dense with technical notation. The accident occurred on Highway 2, westbound on a section of road, with a significant downgrade and 2 curves in close succession. The official report listed brake failure as the probable cause. Standard wear, the inspector wrote, consistent with deferred maintenance. I had believed that. For 26 years I had carried guilt about deferred maintenance. Richard had been busy, I had told myself. He was always working. I should have checked his car. I should have asked. The supplemental inspection, I said, conducted 6 weeks later by a second mechanic hired by the insurance company to verify the claim. Frank placed his finger on a paragraph near the bottom of the page. This inspector noted that the wear pattern on the brake components was inconsistent with gradual degradation. His words were, and I am reading directly, "The degree of material loss in the primary brake line is not consistent with standard use patterns and may indicate intervention by an outside party." The trumpet in its velvet case blurred slightly. I blinked. "He used the word intervention," I said. "He did, and then he filed the report, and the insurance company paid the claim, and the report was added to the supplemental file, and no one followed up." Frank closed the folder. "I found it 8 months after Richard's accident when I was reviewing related documentation during the Brandon investigation. I flagged it to my supervisor. My supervisor told me that a single inspector's notation was not sufficient grounds to reclassify an accidental death, and that pursuing it would create significant complications for a case that was already closed. I understood what complications meant. It meant a dead man whose death had been ruled accidental. A second son disappeared and declared presumed dead, a family already destroyed, and a department that did not want to explain how both events connected. "Richard found out," I said. My voice had gone very quiet. "About the money, about what Brandon was planning. That is what I believe," Frank said. He did not dress it up or hedge it. "Based on the withdrawal timeline and the date of Richard's accident, I believe Richard discovered what Brandon was doing with the joint account funds, the structured withdrawals, the insurance policy, and confronted him, or planned to. And I believe Brandon acted before that confrontation could happen. Richard had been the careful one, the organized one, the one who checked figures twice and kept receipts and noticed when something did not add up. Of course he had found it. Of course he had. He had been 28 years old. He had liked the Mariners and terrible science fiction novels and the specific brand of terrible coffee that only comes from a gas station on a road trip. And he used to call me every Sunday evening at 7 o'clock because he said Sunday evenings were the loneliest time of the week, and a phone call fixed that. And he had found his brother's secret, and he had been 28 years old, and I had spent 26 years believing he died because nobody checked his brakes. Something broke open in my chest that I had been holding shut for a very long time. I pressed both hands flat on the counter and dropped my head, and I wept. Not quietly and not briefly, the full, ugly, uncontrolled grief of a man who has just understood the true dimensions of what was taken from him, a father who lost 2 sons on the same week in November, and only now in a pawn shop on a Thursday morning, 26 years later, learned that one of those losses was a choice someone made. Frank did not move. He did not speak. He stood on the other side of the counter and let me have it the way a man who has been carrying someone else's terrible news for 25 years understands that the moment of delivery belongs entirely to the person receiving it. I do not know how long it lasted. Long enough that the traffic outside changed and a bus went past and someone walked by the window and did not look in. When I straightened up, my face was wet and my chest hurt with a particular ache of grief that has been expressed rather than suppressed. I wiped my face with the back of my hand. I looked at Frank across the counter. "Brandon chose November 9th, I said. My voice was raw, but it was steady. 5 days before his own plan, so that by the time anyone thought to ask questions about Richard Brandon would already be gone, and the family would be too destroyed to push back. Frank nodded once. "I have spent 25 years, I said slowly, grieving 2 sons. One who I thought was taken from me by accident. One who I thought was taken from me by tragedy." I picked up the folder from the counter and held it against my chest alongside the first one. Neither of them was an accident. Neither of them was tragedy. They were decisions made by someone I raised. The shop was very quiet. Then something shifted in me, not loudly, not dramatically, but with the irreversible certainty of a load-bearing wall that has found its foundation. The grief did not go away. It would not go away. But underneath it, or perhaps because of it, something else settled into place, clean and cold and absolutely clear. I looked up at Frank. "I need to make a phone call," I said. "And then I need to get into that gala." Frank reached under the counter and slid a phone across the glass toward me, an old landline handset corded, connected to a line that ran through the shop's own account, nothing that could be traced back to Arthur Brooks. "Arthur Wallace," he said. "He's expecting a call. He just doesn't know when." I picked up the receiver. For the first time in 25 years, I was not a man waiting for something to happen to him. 36 hours is enough time to make a plan if you have the right person helping you make it. Arthur Wallace turned out to be exactly what Frank Miller's business card had promised, a compact, precise man in his mid-60s who listened to everything I told him in the back room of Miller's Exchange without interrupting once, and then spent 20 minutes asking questions so specific and so exactly the right ones that I understood, within the first 5 of them, why Frank had been holding that card for 11 years. Wallace had spent 30 years in financial litigation. He knew what evidence looked like and what it needed to do. And by the time we finished talking, he had 3 calls to make, and I had 1 task left: get into the gala. I was standing in the men's room of a coffee shop 2 blocks from Thorn Tower, looking at myself in the mirror above the sink. The building services uniform had come from a rental company. Wallace knew: dark gray pants, a matching jacket with a generic logo on the chest. The kind of clothing that makes a person functionally invisible in any commercial building in America, because no one looks at maintenance staff. Not really. They look through them the way people look through windows, registering presence without registering detail. I had the watch cap from Goodwill pulled low. I had a clipboard Wallace had put together, with actual building permits for the tower printed from public records, because a man with a clipboard in a uniform is not a man anyone stops to question. I looked old. I looked tired. I looked like a man who had been on shift since 6 in the morning and had 4 hours left to go. I looked like no one. "You understand the timing," Wallace had said when we went over the plan for the 3rd time that afternoon. He was a man who went over things 3 times. I respected that. "You have the window between 9:15 and 9:40 when the catering staff rotates through the service entrance. After 9:40, the security cycle resets, and the north stairwell camera comes back online." I understood the timing. I pushed open the coffee shop door and stepped into the cold November night. Thorn Tower was lit from the base to the crown, every floor blazing the kind of building that announces itself against the Seattle skyline, the way a shout announces itself in a quiet room. There were cars lined up along the block, dropping off guests in evening wear, and the front entrance was bright and attended, and I did not go anywhere near it. I went around the back. The service entrance on the north side was exactly where the building permit said it would be: a wide steel door propped open with a rubber wedge, a catering van idling at the curb, 2 men in white jackets moving equipment on a dolly. I fell in behind them, with my clipboard up and my eyes forward, and walked through the door without breaking stride. Nobody spoke to me. Nobody looked at me. I was maintenance, which meant I was furniture. The service elevator took me to the 44th floor. I found the VIP corridor by following the sound of the event, a low-layered murmur of 500 conversations happening simultaneously. The clink of glassware, the particular frequency of wealth gathered in one room. The VIP men's room was at the far end of the corridor past the secondary bar and the coat check marked with a small brass plate that distinguished it from the service bathroom I had just passed. I went in, I checked all 3 stalls. Empty. I positioned myself at the far end of the counter clipboard on the sink beside me, and I waited. I waited 4 minutes. The door opened. Brandon walked in alone. He was exactly as he had appeared on the television screen 3 nights ago. The charcoal suit, the silver at his temples. The practiced ease of a man who has worn authority long enough that it has become indistinguishable from his actual self. He was looking down at his phone when he entered, scrolling through something with his thumb, and for one fraction of a second, I had the disorienting experience of seeing my son's face on a stranger's body before the 2 things collapsed back into one terrible fact. He looked up. He looked at me in the mirror. He did not startle. He did not step back. His thumb stopped moving on the phone, and he looked at my reflection with an expression that was not surprise and not fear, but something I had not expected, and that was worse than either. Amusement. "I wondered if you'd make it past the parking garage," he said. His voice was exactly as it had been on the broadcast. Smooth, unhurried, the voice of a man who has not been genuinely caught off guard in a very long time. "The facial recognition flagged you at the B2 level. I've been watching you on the security feed since you came in through the service entrance." He slipped the phone into his jacket pocket. "You look tired, Dad." The word landed like something thrown. Dad. He said it the way you say a word you have not used in so long, it has lost its meaning, not with cruelty exactly, but with the carelessness of someone who knows it will land hard and has decided that is acceptable. "Brandon," I said. My voice came out steadier than I felt. "William," he corrected without heat. "It's been William for a long time." He crossed to the sink, 2 positions down from me, turned on the tap, and washed his hands with the unhurried calm of a man who has already decided how this conversation ends. He did not look at me directly. He looked at me in the mirror, which felt deliberate, keeping a layer of glass between whatever was happening and whatever he wanted to feel about it. "You should leave," he said. "Whatever you came here to do, it won't work. You don't have anything I haven't already accounted for." "You accounted for the wrong things," I said. He smiled, not warmly, the smile of a man entertaining a theory he has already disproved. "You're 71 years old," he said. "You came here in a maintenance uniform with a clipboard. You broke out of a house that was specifically designed to—" He stopped himself, recalibrated. The smile stayed, but something behind it shifted just slightly, like a picture that is almost level, but not quite. "You should go home, Dad, while you still can." He dried his hands on a towel and dropped it in the bin. Then he stepped toward the door and opened it, and 2 men in dark jackets stepped in from the corridor. Not police, not security in any official sense. Private, the kind of private that does not ask questions and does not file reports. "Escort Mr. Brooks to the service exit," Brandon said pleasantly. "Make sure he gets there." The men moved toward me. I did not resist. There was no point in resisting, and more importantly, there was no need. Because in the 4 seconds between Brandon opening the door and the 2 men reaching me, I had closed the distance between myself and my son under the pretense of stepping aside. And in that movement, in the brief incidental contact of a father and a son passing each other in a men's room, for the last time, my right hand had found the hem of his jacket and left something there. The alley behind Thorn Tower smelled of rain and restaurant grease, and the particular cold that comes off Seattle pavement in November, the kind that settles into clothing and stays there. I was on my hands and knees when the service door closed behind me. The 2 men in dark jackets had not been rough exactly. They had been efficient, which is worse in some ways because efficiency implies practice. They had moved me through the service corridor and out the north exit with the professional detachment of people who do this often enough that they have stopped thinking of the person they are moving as a person. The last thing I registered before the door swung shut was the sound of the gala, that layered murmur of 500 conversations, cutting off, completely replaced by the hiss of rain on concrete. I got to my feet. My right shoulder had taken most of the impact when I caught myself against the alley wall, the same shoulder I had landed on, coming over the fence that morning 2 days ago. And it was communicating its displeasure in terms that were no longer ignorable. I pressed my back against the brick and breathed through it the way you breathe through pain when stopping is not an option. "Arthur," Wallace stepped out of the shadow of the dumpster enclosure 12 feet to my left. He was holding an umbrella and wearing his overcoat and looking at me with the expression of a man who had prepared for this exact scenario and was nonetheless not pleased to see it confirmed. He crossed to me, quickly put a hand on my arm, and looked at my face in the dim light from the service door fixture. "How bad?" he said. "Manageable," I said. He was waiting for me, facial recognition from the parking garage. He knew before I reached the floor. Wallace absorbed this without visible reaction, which was one of the things I had come to appreciate about him in 36 hours. He processed information the way good accountants process numbers, completely and without drama. "Did you get it on?" he asked. "Yes." He exhaled, not with relief, exactly more, with the satisfaction of a specific box being checked. He reached into his overcoat pocket and produced a small receiver, flat and black, no larger than a deck of cards. A green light on its face was blinking steadily. "Active?" he said. "He's moving, elevator sounds like." He handed me an earpiece. "Put this in." I fitted it into my right ear. Through it, I could hear the ambient sound of the gala, the same murmur I had heard cut off 30 seconds ago. Now restored through the chip I had pressed into the hem of Brandon's jacket in the 4 seconds of contact we had in that men's room. The audio was clear enough to make out individual voices near Brandon, the clink of his glass, the particular acoustics of a large room with high ceilings. Then Brandon's voice came through close and deliberate. "Get me a secure line," he said to someone. A pause, then a different voice, lower, male brief. Another pause. Then Brandon again, and his tone had shifted in a way I recognized from 30 years of listening to people who were performing rather than talking. He was projecting just slightly more than the ambient noise around him required. He knew the chip was there. The realization settled over me without the jolt I might have expected. Of course he knew. A man who had built an organization capable of pushing my photograph into a city's broadcast network within 4 minutes of a credit card transaction was not a man whose building lacked the ability to scan for unauthorized electronic devices. He had known the moment I stepped into that elevator. He had said nothing because a man who knows about the chip can use the chip. The account documentation is at the Meridian office. Brandon said into the phone, his voice carrying exactly the right texture of a man conducting private business. 42nd floor. The access code for the secure room is in the secondary file under Sentinel. Have someone there by 11. A brief pause. Yes. All of it. Wallace had gone very still beside me. Meridian building, he said quietly. 42nd floor, 11 o'clock. He looked at me. That's 40 minutes from now. He knows we're listening, I said. Wallace looked at the receiver in his hand. Then he looked at me. Something moved through his expression, the rapid silent recalibration of a man who is very good at his job, encountering a problem that is better than he expected. He's sending us somewhere, Wallace said. Yes. The question is what's waiting there. I leaned back against the brick wall and thought about Brandon standing in that men's room, rinsing his hands, telling me I didn't have anything he hadn't already accounted for. He had known about the chip. He had known I would listen to whatever he said next. And he had said exactly this, a building a floor, an access code, a time with the smooth delivery of a man leaving a trail of breadcrumbs for someone he has already decided to watch walk into a trap. He was not trying to hide the account documentation. He was trying to find out who was helping me. If Wallace and I showed up at the Meridian building at 11 o'clock, Brandon would know I had a lawyer. He would know the lawyer's name from the building's visitor log. He would have 40 minutes to prepare whatever legal or financial mechanism he intended to use to shut Wallace down before Wallace could file anything. The Meridian address was not a location. It was a diagnostic designed to tell Brandon exactly how much of a threat I had assembled in 36 hours. We don't go, I said. Agreed. Wallace pocketed the receiver. But we let him think we might. He looked at his watch. We have 40 minutes before he realizes we're not coming. That is 40 minutes during which his attention is divided between the gala and the Meridian building. He looked at me. Monica and Laura land at SeaTac at 10:15. I turned to look at him. I called Monica this morning, he said simply. Through Frank's line, she had already bought the tickets. A pause. She said to tell you she packed the USB. The USB, the Sentinel Trust access codes. I pushed off the brick wall. My shoulder ached. My knee was stiff. I was 71 years old, and I was standing in a rain-soaked alley behind the tallest building my son had ever put his name on, and I had 38 minutes before Monica Brooks walked through the arrivals gate at SeaTac with a USB drive that was going to change everything. Then we go get them, I said. Wallace was already moving toward the mouth of the alley. Arthur, he said, without turning around. For what it's worth, he made a mistake tonight. I fell in behind him, pulling the watch cap back down over my ears against the rain. What mistake? I said. He let you leave, Wallace said. A man who was actually certain he had won would not have let you walk out of that building. He would have called the police and had you detained. I thought about that for the half block it took us to reach the street. He was right. Brandon had not called the police. He had sent me to the Meridian building instead, which was a move designed to gather information rather than end the game. And a man who is gathering information is a man who is not yet sure he has won. That was the smallest possible foothold. But I had built things from smaller. Wallace's office was on the 11th floor of a building, 4 blocks from the waterfront. The kind of space that belonged to a man who had spent 3 decades being very good at something and had stopped needing to announce it. No artwork on the walls, no award plaques. Just bookshelves, filing cabinets, and a desk that was covered in the organized disorder of someone who knew exactly where everything was and did not care how it looked to anyone else. Monica and Laura were already there when we arrived. They had taken a car from SeaTac directly to the address Wallace had given Monica that morning. Laura still had her nursing school bag over one shoulder, the same bag she had been packing textbook-sized pieces of paper into for months to bring to a mother who was trying to save a man neither of them had been allowed to help. Monica was in her coat, her dark hair loose a carry-on bag at her feet. She looked like a woman who had made a decision at altitude and arrived on the ground completely committed to it. When she saw me, she pressed both hands over her mouth. Her eyes filled immediately fast and uncontrolled, the tears of someone who has been holding a specific fear at bay for a very long time and has just been released from it. She crossed the room in 4 steps and took both of my hands in hers, and I felt how badly her fingers were shaking a fine, persistent tremor, the kind that comes not from cold, but from sustained months-long tension, finally finding somewhere to go. "You're all right," she said. It was not a question. She was saying it the way you say something you need to hear out loud to believe. "I'm all right," I said. Laura set her bag down by the door and looked at me with the particular expression of a 22-year-old who has done something irreversible and has not yet decided how she feels about it. She had changed out of her scrubs into jeans and a gray pullover, and she looked very young and very awake and not at all afraid. "Mom kept saying you'd be fine," Laura said. "The whole flight every time I asked. He'll be fine, he always figures it out." She paused. "I didn't know you were that kind of person." "Neither did I said, "until recently." Wallace had already moved to his desk. He opened his laptop and held out one hand toward Monica, without looking up. Monica reached into the inside pocket of her coat and produced a USB Drive Small Black, the kind sold in any office supply store. She set it in Wallace's palm. He plugged it in without ceremony and began moving through the files with the speed of a man who had been briefed on what he was looking for. Then Wallace's phone buzzed on the desk. He glanced at it, set it face down, picked it up again immediately, which told me the second look had confirmed something he had not wanted confirmed on the first. The room went quiet in the particular way of people who have just understood that the other side has made a move. Brandon had not waited for 11 o'clock. He had not waited to find out whether we went to the Meridian building. The moment I walked out of that men's room, he had begun the process of dismantling my legal infrastructure, not by going after me directly, which would have been too visible, but by going after Wallace. An attorney under bar investigation cannot file motions, cannot represent clients in court proceedings, cannot take any action that would later be scrutinized by the oversight body reviewing his accounts. It was elegant in the way that very cold things are sometimes elegant. "How long does a bar financial review take?" I asked. "To resolve months, to freeze my ability to act." Wallace looked up. "Hours." Monica stepped forward. "Then we use what we have right now, before the freeze completes." She nodded toward the laptop. "Is it there?" Wallace turned the screen to face the room. The files on the USB were organized with the precision of a woman who had been a very careful prisoner. Monica's name appeared as sole authorized signatory on the Sentinel Trust, a private financial trust established 4 years ago, structured by Brandon's legal team under the name of a shell company registered in Delaware. The trust held accounts in 3 institutions. The total balance across all 3 as of the previous business day was $214 million. Laura made a sound that was not quite a word. Her hand found the back of the nearest chair and gripped it. "He put it in your name," I said to Monica. "Not an accusation, a recognition." "He needed a co-signer who wasn't William Thorne," she said. Her voice was completely level. "William Thorne had to stay clean on paper for the Gala investors, so he used me. He told me it was a family trust. He told me it was for Laura's future." Her jaw tightened. "He gave me signing authority because he needed the paperwork to hold up. He never imagined I would understand what I had signed." Wallace was already typing. As sole authorized signatory, he said, his voice the careful monotone of a man working fast on something that requires precision. "Monica Brooks has the legal authority to direct the disposition of funds held in the Sentinel Trust, without requiring the consent of any other party." He paused. "Brandon structured it this way to keep her liable for the trust's activities. He handed her the keys to keep her trapped inside." Another pause. "He handed her the keys." Monica picked up Wallace's pen from the desk and held it ready. "Where do we send it?" she asked. I had thought about this. I had thought about it in the alley behind Thorne Tower, in the car to SeaTac, in the elevator coming up to this floor. There was an obvious answer, and it was the right one for reasons that had nothing to do with strategy and everything to do with what this money had been built on. Seattle Children's Hospital, I said. The Pediatric Research Endowment. Make it irrevocable. Monica signed 4 documents in the time it took Laura to bring Wallace a glass of water from the credenza. Her handwriting was steady. It did not waver once. Wallace submitted the transfer authorization at 11:23 p.m. He closed the laptop and looked at me across the desk. Brandon will find out within the hour, he said. When he does, he is going to understand that the gala is no longer a celebration. He picked up his coat from the back of his chair. It's a crime scene. I stood up. My shoulder hurt. My knee hurt. I was 71 years old, and I had not slept properly in 3 days, and I was about to walk back into a building that had already thrown me out once. Monica appeared at my side and straightened the collar of my barn jacket with both hands, the small practical gesture of someone who needs to do something useful, with the feeling that has no other outlet. This is the part, she said quietly, where it either works or it doesn't. It works, I said. She looked at me for a moment, then she nodded. Once the way people nod when they have decided to believe something, because the alternative is not acceptable. Wallace held the office door open. We went back out into the night. The front entrance of Thorn Tower was exactly as I had imagined it from the outside 2 hours ago, all glass and light, and the specific warmth that large buildings generate when they are full of people who believe the evening belongs to them. I walked through the front door, wearing Arthur Wallace's spare suit jacket, which was a size too large through the shoulders and a shade of charcoal that was slightly more formal than anything I had worn in 5 years. Wallace walked beside me. Monica and Laura had taken positions in the lobby of the building across the street, where they could see the entrance and where Wallace could reach them by phone within 30 seconds. The invitation was Wallace's, a physical card cream stock embossed lettering, the kind of invitation that gets a person through a door without conversation. The security attendant at the entrance looked at it, looked at Wallace, looked at me, and stepped aside. Wallace had been a prominent name in Seattle financial litigation for 30 years. He had attended events in this building before Brandon owned it. 500 people, crystal candlelight, a string quartet in the far corner, playing something I did not recognize. A banner along the upper mezzanine, Thorn Enterprises, building the future. Brandon was on the raised platform at the far end of the room, one hand on the podium, the other holding a glass, talking to a man in a tuxedo, with the easy authority of someone who has never once in his adult life stood in a room he did not control. I stopped just inside the entrance and looked at him across 500 people and 30 years. He had not seen me yet. Arthur? Wallace's voice was low beside my ear. 11:47. I looked at my watch. 11:47 p.m. The transfer had been submitted at 11:23, which meant that somewhere in the financial infrastructure of Thorn Enterprises, an automated alert was 24 minutes into the process of informing someone that $214 million had just left the Sentinel Trust and was irrevocably on its way to a children's hospital endowment. We had at most another 30 minutes before that alert reached the people in this room. I started walking toward the platform. The crowd was dense enough that I moved through it slowly, and in that slowness, I had time to notice things. The woman standing near the third pillar from the left, slightly apart from the nearest cluster of guests watching Brandon with an expression that was not admiration, and was not pride, and was not any of the things the other faces in the room were wearing. She was perhaps 35, dark-haired, in a gown that fit her the way things fit people who have never had to think about whether things fit. She wore no expression at all, which is its own kind of expression. She saw me looking at her. She looked back at me for 2 seconds. Then she looked at the screen panel on the wall beside the platform, a large display currently showing the Thorn Enterprises logo, and back at me, and gave the smallest possible nod. 1 degree of movement, less than a gesture, more than nothing. Diana Thorn, Brandon's wife, co-owner of the organization whose logo was glowing on that screen. The woman whose family money had given William Thorn his first foothold in Seattle's financial community and whose signature appeared on 12 years of Thorn Enterprises incorporation documents, which meant her name was also on 12 years of whatever her husband had been doing with the company she thought she owned. Wallace had spoken to her that afternoon through 3 intermediaries in a phone call that lasted 11 minutes. I did not know what he had said. I knew only that she had been the one to suggest this room, This evening, this specific arrangement of people and screens and the access codes that controlled both. She moved to the wall panel beside the platform and placed her hand on a small keypad below the screen. The Thorn Enterprises logo disappeared. The screen went briefly dark. Then it came alive with numbers. Not the promotional graphics Brandon had prepared for the evening, not the architect's renderings or the investment portfolio slides or the timeline of Thorn Enterprises' 2 decades of growth. What filled the screen was a financial transfer document, the wire instruction, the account numbers, the receiving institution in Zurich, the amount $214 million initiated at 11:41 p.m. the previous evening by a user ID registered to William Thorn. Not the Sentinel Trust transfer Monica had authorized. This was a different transaction. One Brandon had initiated himself the night before any of this began, a separate movement of funds he had been preparing for weeks. The money he intended to move before the gala concluded and before anyone could file an injunction. The room noticed the screen. The string quartet stopped first, the way music stops when the musicians realize no one is listening. Then the conversations around me began to stutter and pause the way conversations do when 500 people gradually understand that the room has changed. Brandon turned from the man he was talking to and looked at the screen. The glass in his hand did not move. His expression did not change immediately. It went through a sequence so fast I would have missed it if I had not been watching for it. Recognition, calculation, and then the decision to perform confidence, which is what people do when they have run out of actual confidence and need to buy time. He looked out across the room. He found me. I was standing 20 feet from the platform in Arthur Wallace's jacket, with 500 people between us and the city of Seattle visible through the glass walls behind me. I looked exactly like what I was, an old man who had driven his dead son's empire into a wall and was standing in the wreckage watching it settle. He smiled. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, and his voice through the room's sound system was still smooth, still practiced still, the voice of a man who believes the room is his. "I apologize for the interruption. It appears someone has accessed our display system." He set his glass down on the podium. "I want to assure our investors that the financial information you're seeing does not represent. It represents exactly what it is," I said. My voice was not amplified. I was 20 feet away in a room full of people, and the acoustics of the space carried it anyway, the way certain silences carry certain voices. Brandon stopped. "It is a wire transfer instruction," I said, "for $214 million initiated by William Thorn to an account in Zurich at 11:41 last evening, not last year, not in 1999, last evening." I looked at him across the distance between us. "The statute of limitations you are about to reference applies to crimes committed 25 years ago. It does not apply to crimes committed last Tuesday." The room was very quiet. Brandon's smile remained on his face, the way a photograph of a smile remains on a face, present in form, absent in everything else. "That's my father," he said, and his voice was still steady, still performing, aimed at the crowd rather than at me. "He's been unwell. My name is Arthur James Brooks," I said. "I am 71 years old. I have not been unwell. I have been in a basement." I looked out at the 500 faces between us. I was placed there by the man standing at that podium, whose legal name is Brandon Brooks, not William Thorn, and who has been declared legally dead in the state of Washington since December of 1999. The quiet in the room changed quality. It became the kind of quiet that has weight. Brandon opened his mouth, and then Diana Thorne stepped up onto the platform beside him and turned to face the room, and whatever Brandon had been about to say died in his throat. She looked nothing like a woman who had been surprised by the evening's events. She looked like a woman who had been waiting for this specific moment for a very long time and had dressed accordingly. "My name is Diana Thorne," she said into the room's microphone with a clarity that made the string quartet's silence feel like a held breath. "I am the majority shareholder of Thorn Enterprises, and I am revoking William Thorne's operational authority effective immediately." She looked at Brandon with the expression of someone closing a chapter they have read too many times. "Security, please clear the platform." Brandon's hand reached for the microphone. A man in a dark suit stepped out of the crowd at the base of the platform stairs. He moved with the particular purpose of someone who has been waiting in a room for permission to do something and has just received it. He held up a credential wallet briefly, efficiently, the practice motion of someone who shows credentials many times a day. "Special Agent Harrison, FBI," he said. "Mr. Thorne, I need you to step down from the platform." Brandon looked at the credential. He looked at Diana. He looked at me. For the first time since I had watched him on a television screen 3 nights ago in a basement eating cold soup on my birthday, I saw something in my son's face that was not confidence and was not performance and was not the curated ease of a man who has never been caught. He looked for one unguarded second like a boy who had broken something irreplaceable and had just now understood that it could not be fixed. Then the moment passed, and he was William Thorne again, stepping down from the platform with Special Agent Harrison at his shoulder, moving through the parting crowd with his chin up and his face arranged in the expression of a man who intends to resolve this through his attorneys. Diana Thorne watched him go. Then she looked at me across the platform. "Mr. Brooks," she said, "I believe we have some paperwork to discuss." Monica came through the side entrance with Laura 2 steps behind her. She went straight to Harrison and produced a compact digital recorder, the kind that meets federal evidentiary standards, not a phone recording. She did not look at Brandon once. "My name is Monica Brooks," she said. "The recording begins at 47 minutes. In it, the man you know as William Thorne describes his plans for my father-in-law in the event he tried to leave." She held it out. "It was made with the prior authorization of your office through a consent agreement arranged by Mr. Wallace this afternoon. It is legally admissible." Harrison took it. Brandon's composure came apart in pieces. "That money belongs to Thorne Enterprises," he said, his voice stripped of the gala smoothness now hard underneath. $214 million moved without authorization. I want it reversed. The Sentinel Trust, I said, was established in Monica Brooks's name, with Monica Brooks as sole authorized signatory by her own legal team. I set the formation papers on the platform beside him. "You gave her signing authority to keep her liable. She used it because she decided she was done." Wallace stepped forward. "Furthermore, the individual claiming rights over that trust is William Thorne, a constructed identity. The legal claimant would be Brandon Brooks, declared dead by King County Superior Court in December of 1999. A dead man cannot claim a financial instrument he does not appear on." Brandon heard the handcuffs before he saw them. His shoulders tightened. His chin came up. "I want my attorneys," he said. "They'll be notified," Harrison said. The cuffs locked, one, then the other. 3 feet from the side door, Brandon stopped and looked at me. "Tell them I'm still your son." I looked at the scar beneath his chin, pale curved, the one I had stitched when he was 10 years old, and I felt the grief of it move through me, clean and complete. "My son went out to buy me a birthday cake 25 years ago," I said. "He never came home. You are the man living in his place, and I am done pretending otherwise." The door closed. The room exhaled. The holding room had no windows. Brandon sat across from me in his charcoal suite, hands in his lap, the handcuffs removed at Wallace's request. 2 agents waited outside the door. He looked like a man who had spent 25 years building a version of himself that could withstand anything, and was now sitting very still because he understood that version was gone. I set 2 documents on the table: the transfer agreement for the house, and Frank Miller's supplemental report, the mechanical inspector's notation about Richard's accident, the words that had waited 26 years to matter. "Sign it," I said. "The house, the deed, everything." He read the supplemental report first. He did not react visibly, but his hands, which had been still tightened once in his lap and then released. He understood what I was holding. He understood what I could do with it. He picked up the pen and signed the transfer agreement without speaking. I took the document, I stood. Then I stopped at the door, unfolded the supplemental report, and set it back on the table in front of him. "Keep it," I said. "Live with what you know." He said nothing. I did not need him to. 1 year later, on November 14th, Laura carried a white bakery box through the front office of Arthur Brooks Legal Aid for Seniors and set it on my desk. The string was tied twice around it, the way bakeries do when something needs to arrive whole. She sat across from me. "From both of us," she said. Inside was a birthday cake, 9 inches, white frosting, not a receipt, not a ghost. A real cake for a real birthday in a room that used to be a basement and now had no door at all, because some rooms do not need to be locked anymore. I looked at it. I looked at Laura. "Thank you," I said. I picked up the knife. Looking back at this dark family story, the deepest scar isn't the one under Brandon's chin, it's the one carved into my soul by a brutal family betrayal. I spent 25 years blinded by grief, completely oblivious to the monster. I raised a man who traded his brother's life and his father's freedom for corporate power. Don't be like me. Don't let your love blind you to the warning signs, and never let your grief calcify until you become a prisoner of your own affection. Only God knows the true depths of human deception. But as a forensic accountant, I learned too late that the most dangerous frauds are the ones we refuse to audit out of love. This final ledger is clear. Real family is built on truth, not a bloodline wrapped in corporate greed. If this tragic family story touched your heart, please comment your thoughts, share this video, and subscribe to our channel for more sophisticated, deep storytelling. Thank you so much for watching until the very end. Warning: the following stories contain fictional elements structured strictly for educational purposes. If you prefer not to continue, please exit now to find content better suited to your preferences.